Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story. The bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
And I am Richard. I'm the founder of Tick Talent, and we are delighted to sponsor this podcast.
This week's episode is with Grant. What did you think of this week's episode?
So Grant is one of my favourite people that I've managed to meet through this whole process. And we've already recorded a separate video about whether companies should hire fractional, interim or full-time chief revenue officers. And he's just one of these incredibly open, good guys, right? Like a genuinely honest, good, lovely guy, but loads of depth. So when you ask him a question, he never just goes like I would do. There's a real wisdom and depth. There's a real wisdom and depth behind what he says, and I always find it fascinating to speak with him. And we've managed to, through a series of phone conversations and video conversations over the last sort of 2 months, become quite good friends, which I'm really, really proud to say. So I think that there's going to be, in this episode, a very, very interesting story of someone who's worked through a 25-year career in tech for some of the biggest companies in the world, growing them from like 300 to multiple billions of revenue, and has now become almost like a gun for hire chief revenue officer that can come into a business as a fractional or an interim person and offer all of that experience in this really sort of, concentrated way, which I think takes a huge amount of skill. It's almost like being, the sort of miracle signing that a sports team brings in to save their season, or to build the foundations of their club. So I think it's going to be really interesting. What did you like about it?
What you were saying about it's a special skill set to be able to come into an environment in a fractional way, that's actually really, really tough. So I really admire the fact that he can do that and do that really, really well. And I just really enjoyed the conversation with him. He's super chill, super cool. Yeah, really, really good conversation.
Fantastic. Well, without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Grant, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm good, Tolu. How are you?
Very well, thank you. I'm really looking forward to our recording and getting a little bit more into your career. Cool. So our first question is, Grant, what makes you tick?
What makes me tick? I think from a work perspective, working with great people. I've been very, very fortunate in my career that I've worked with some really great people, great leaders, great peers, and I carried that on into what I do now, working for myself. So I'm always looking for good teams to work with, good people to work with. So from a work point of view, that's what makes me tick. Personally, family makes me tick.
You mentioned working with great people. If you had to quantify that and explain that a little bit, what do you mean by great people? What does that look like for you?
I think there's a few aspects to it. I think working with people that are committed, and that's why I love the interim work and the consulting work that I do now, because generally working with founders, they are absolutely 100% invested in the business. So there's no questioning commitment with founders. Mostly, I've met a few that don't tick that box, but the majority of them are absolutely committed because it's their baby, it's their dream, it's their vision, and all of that good stuff. So there's that part to commitment. But I think people that want to enjoy what they do, don't take themselves too seriously, are happy to take the piss out of themselves and other people, and just that kind of dynamic in a team, I think, is good fun. And I know it's fairly hackneyed and a lot of people say it, but the more fun you have in what you do for a living, I think the better you are at it. And 99% of the roles I've done in corporate and also interim and consulting projects, I've enjoyed more or less every minute of it. There's been challenges and difficulties, but people who are committed don't take themselves too seriously, but really take the vision and the objectives they're working towards seriously. Those would be the two key things. But also people that care about each other. Again, that also sounds very hackneyed and well worn. But the last interim role that I did, the private equity partner asked me the same question: what you're looking for? And I said people that enjoy what they do and are committed to what they do, but also people that care about the other people that they work with. And that's all of those are important to me. I mean, obviously the business objective and the vision and the direction and the opportunity needs to be there for me to really get engaged. But if the people aspects are there, then I'll get a lot of fulfillment out of it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And would you mind talking through your career, how you got to where you're doing the interim role? So what kind of roles did you have before? What kind of companies did you work for? It'd be great to hear that.
So right from the start, so from school leaving, or do you want me just to wind it forward a bit?
So it would be interesting to hear kind of like if you studied, what did you study? So yes, from some school leaving sounds good.
So I left school at 17 with not very much in the way of certificates. I was a committed musician, was convinced that I was going to be a successful musician. And I worked in a clothes shop for about 6 months, and then the band that I was in got a record deal. So for about 3 to 4 years, I was a professional musician. And then, that clearly didn't work out, or you and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation. And I loved music, loved the creative side of music and creating music and all of that stuff. And we were lucky, we had a major deal, so we did the touring, we did the recording in big studios, all of that stuff. Wow. But it just wasn't. It was actually a great insight into a dysfunctional team, because we just didn't work as a band. The chemistry, the dynamic didn't work. Anyway, so got to the point where I wanted to do something else. So I started an independent record label, and then decided that I was more interested in the business side of that and doing deals and distribution and all of that stuff than I was in the music. Realised that if I wanted to study anything formally, I didn't have the qualifications for it. So I went to college for a year when I was about 22, 23, to get the qualifications that got me into Strathclyde University Business School. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a career path. But when I got to uni, I did a general business studies degree. And that had a lot of opportunity to do additional marketing modules. So I focused heavily on marketing, felt that might play to my creative side, and combine the business career that I was looking to establish. And I was absolutely convinced at that point, so this would have been 92, 93, something like that. Graduated in 97. So I was convinced at that point that I wanted to work in a marketing agency. I tried, there was Edinburgh and Glasgow had a big creative agency base. And I just couldn't get through the door. Couldn't get a job, got a couple of interviews. And then went to one of the milk round. BAE Systems, at the time they were called GEC Marine, were looking for marketing analysts. So I joined them as a marketing graduate trainee in September of 97. And then it was supposed to be a two-year course for the graduates. But I mean, I was older, I was more mature, I had a family, I was mortgaged, so I kind of I stood out a bit from the other graduates who were fresh out of uni. And after about 5 or 6 weeks, they took me off the graduate program, and I started working as a commercial bid manager for major defence projects. And very, very different from what I'd expected to do and what I'd intended to do. But it was essentially in the shipbuilding divisions, and the business, the heartbeat of the business was project management. There were hundreds of thousands or millions of tasks, literally, in the construction of a ship. So the whole culture of the business was project management. It was all about deadlines, milestones, gate reviews, all of that stuff. And if I point to anything from that period that I carried forward into the rest of my career, it was that project management philosophy. That heavy engineering environment wasn't anything like what I'd expected to be doing. But you had a project plan for everything. And through my corporate career and also into my consulting and interim leadership positions, that project management approach has always been there. It's become part of my DNA, if you like, in terms of how I approach any role that I'm involved in. So I did about 4 years there. and wasn't using my marketing degree in any shape or form, and decided to apply for marketing roles, marketing manager roles. Didn't have any experience in that area, so it was a bit of a gamble, and someone had to take a bit of a gamble on me. And I found a role, marketing manager for Europe, with a company called Aggreko. And the recruiting manager was a huge music fan and a big cyclist, which I not quite, well, I'm bigger physically now, but I'm not as big a cyclist as I was then. And he liked my CV, and he kept sticking it to the top of the pile. HR kept trying to reject me. He kept sticking it to the top of the pile because they thought I looked like an interesting candidate. And that was in 2000, and I got the job, marketing manager for Europe, or head of marketing for Europe. And I stayed with that business for about 19 years, up until 2019.
Wow.
And I did various roles there, and I can talk you through all of them if you want me to. But it was an incredible journey, an incredible growth journey. I mean, I joined the business in 2000, and it was a PLC, but it was a small PLC, about 350 million turnover. It was not huge by any means. And then within 15 to 20 years, it's now 1.7, 1.8 billion, thereabouts, that sort of level of turnover. And two things for me that I took from that. One, a business that grows that rapidly organically, and it was majoritively organically. There was some acquisition, but not much. Created lots of opportunity for personal growth, for career growth. And I was fortunate to be part of that journey, and it opened up. I think I did 7 roles there, and I'll give you the chronology in a second. But to be part of that growth story was fantastic for my career. And you probably haven't spoken to many, if any, people on your podcast that have been with one company for 19 years. Am I right? Is that? Am I the only one?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
But the business was growing so rapidly, and I was fortunate to be at the heart of it and to be part of it, and to feel like part of it. There was never a dull moment in that 19 years. And so I did head of marketing for Europe. Then I took a GM role, running Scotland, and then that became a business unit leadership role running Scotland and Scandinavia. Then ran the sales and marketing function for Europe, then global head of sales, then head of digital transformation for sales and marketing. So I joined just at the point before we got the new chief exec, who had an incredible vision for the business, and drove the growth in that organization over the course of, I think he joined in 2002. We did the strategy review, and then the growth from then was just exponential. I mean, there was a period in that time that I was with the business that we were growing at 25% CAGR. And that operationally creates enormous challenges for a business.
Yeah, challenges.
But there was huge sales and revenue opportunity. And yeah, I mean, it might be interesting to talk about. So I came out of I did a marketing degree, essentially. It was business studies, but I threw everything I had into the marketing parts because I thought that would play to my creative side. So then I came into that business as in a marketing leadership role, and the business was not marketing led. It was a sales led organization, and probably still is to this day. But marketing was not a big part of the lead gen mix. It was not a big part of the branding. It just wasn't a big part of didn't have a big seat at the table, if you want to call it that. Then we did a strategic review in 2002. And I was part of the team looking at the sales and marketing organizational design and development. And I quite quickly came to the conclusion that my role wasn't required. It was a pretty odd place to be. To be in a strategic review and think, fuck, my role doesn't make sense right now for this business.
Yeah.
So we restructured the business, and we went from dozens and dozens and dozens of very small, independently operating businesses with their own management team, their own sales leader, and their own to areas. So North UK with Scotland became an area. Nordics became an area. So bigger organisations, and they needed P&L leadership within those business unit MDs, regional directors, AGMs, whatever you want to call them. And I, at this point in my career, desperately wanted to be at the front end of the business and wanted to stay with this organisation because it just felt right. So I applied. For this, business unit leadership role from a marketing role, and there was lots of, good luck. I hope you got on all right with that, and let us know how it goes. And I mean, I was fortunate. There was another candidate who was probably more likely to get it than I. He did something else, and I got this role. I got this plum role, running a business unit in a business PLC with huge ambitions that was about to start on a massive growth trajectory, and it just I couldn't believe it. And I had a few phone calls that went along the lines of, just phoning to congratulate you on getting that role. And then there'd be a pause, and then it would be, can't say I'm not surprised. So no one had ever moved. No one had ever in the business moved from a marketing role into a general management role. It just was unheard of.
Yes.
And there wasn't really any logic to why I did it. I just felt that that's where I wanted to be. And a few times in my career, I've been able to follow that sense, that intuition, and not necessarily apply logic to it. And it takes, I guess, looking back now, it takes a bit of guts to do that, to be able to say, well, I don't have the CV for this, I don't have the experience for this, but I know I can do the role. And look, I had to be lucky. They had to take a chance on me, and the guy, the MD of the business unit of the full of Europe at the time, took a chance on me. He just said, "We'll give it a go," and it was phenomenally successful. I'm very glad to say. So yeah. Anyway, I'm digressing a bit, but it was at that point that was a pivotal point in my career, because I was either going to stay in marketing but go elsewhere, like leave the business, or if I was going to stay in the business, I would have been in a smaller, marginalized marketing role, or I was going to get this plum role that nobody thought, except me, that I should get or could do. So fortunately, it was the final one of those options, and I was very, very glad to stay around.
So you mentioned that role was phenomenally successful. What do you think made it phenomenally successful, and how did you prepare yourself for that transition? Because that's quite a big shift.
So I mentioned there was no logic to it. So how did I prepare myself? I just got stuck in, and that's not. Yeah, it's not really the ideal preparation that you want to be telling candidates who are applying for jobs now. Look, it was a specific point in time with a business that was at a specific point in its journey. So literally, and when I took it on, it was a fairly small business unit. So if they were going to take a risk with anyone in any business unit, it would have been this one, right? I mean, it was, a few million turnover. Compared to the rest of the business units in the organisation, it was fairly small. So I guess to a point it was low risk. All I knew was, one, I wanted to stay with that business. Two, that role was right at the front end. It was in the limelight. It was visible. The stakes were high for me because, if I monumentally messed it up, then, I would be leaving that business anyway. So I don't know. My preparation, it's a great question. I think the only thing that prepared me for it was, even early in my career, even in my marketing role that I did there, even in the marketing analytics and bid management role I did at BAE Systems, I was always obsessed with understanding the opportunity. Always. How could the business grow? How could you find the customers? Yes. What would make the customers want to buy from you? I was just obsessed by that. So that prepared me, because I went into a business unit that, I managed the sales team directly because it was a small business. And also, anyone going into a general management role unless the business is too big to do it, I would always suggest to them, if you can, either run the sales team directly or be very, very, very close to it via your sales leader, because that gets you close to your customers, gets you close to the opportunity, gets you close to understanding what it is that you actually have to be talking to the customers about when you're in front of them, and what makes your customers tick. So that prepared me. I also, now I said I didn't do any prep, but I was thinking about this. I genuinely care about people. I genuinely do. And that's whether it's people working as part of my team, or the part of the team that I'm in, or part of the senior leadership team that I'm in. I genuinely care about people. And so I was running sales and operations, and I had all of the back office stuff going on as well. But I think the prep for me, or what prepped me for it, was going into that caring about other people being successful. Again, you'll read 15 times a day on LinkedIn, it's not about you, it's about your teammates being successful and great leaders, all of that stuff. But I think I'm fortunate to say that I genuinely do care about people, and I would rather give someone space and freedom, and let them make a few mistakes. That I don't have the concentration to micromanage people. I just don't. I just don't. If anyone's ended up in my team that needed micromanagement, they wouldn't work out for them or for me.
Yeah.
So I think ironically that means that I kind of by default have to give people space. I do hold people accountable, and make sure objectives are clear and there's some structure and process and targets and all of that stuff. But I kind of naturally gravitate towards the person, being interested in them, giving them some space and freedom. And apart from a very, very few occasions, that's not really let me down, to be honest. Sorry, that was, again, I seem to be digressing again. But that was my preparation, really. I absolutely cared what the opportunity was, what the customers wanted, all of that commercialization of it, and I cared about the people and the structure. So I didn't do anything more than that. I had some people in the organisation that I knew well who had done GM, P&L leadership roles previously. So I was part of a group of peers that I could tap into and talk to and relate to and say, what the fuck do I do about this? And that kind of stuff. But it was more around absolute obsession about what the opportunity was. And for that business, it was oil and gas, energy, renewables. There was a huge boom happening, and we just weren't even at the races with it. So that we kind of rode the crest of that and grew the business almost about 7 or 8 fold in 6 years.
Wow.
And the other thing was the people. I just one thing that worried me about moving out of corporate and working for myself was, will I get isolated? I get energy from people. I get energy from being around people.
Right.
And that helped me. So I don't know if that answers your question in any way, but those would be the 3 things that prepared me for it. I didn't go out of my way to prepare for it, but those are the 3 things that prepared me. Focus on the opportunity, worry about the people, worry about the structure.
I think that is really helpful, because I think that sometimes when people are making that transition into something that they're not that familiar with, or they're not necessarily the best suited, in quotes, for it, you kind of think, okay, where do I start? What are some of the things that I should be focusing on? And I think those 3 things are hugely important. Understanding the opportunity, asking lots of questions, being really curious, huge. Focusing on the people, I think, is really, really important, because people is really what you're going to succeed or fail on. You can understand the opportunity, have the best plan, but if you're not taking care of the people, it's not going to last. And then I think what you said about the structure is also so important.
I think, and again, it was at a certain point in my career in a business that was at a certain point in its journey, and to an extent, ignorance was bliss. I was blind to the fact that I probably should not have had the job. When I could hear it, people And actually, when I applied, the recruiting MD, the European MD, kind of tried to put me off. We had a conversation that went along the lines of, yeah, there's some sales manager roles going, Grant, that, might it be a good step up to this sort of thing in the future. I was like, nope, no, I'm not withdrawing my application. Yeah. I'm still applying for the GM role. It's not happening. And he was like, wow. Okay, all right, fair enough. And then, look, they gave me the job. So I will be eternally grateful to have got that opportunity and to have been part of that growth story. And the other thing about it is what I've carried over now. So, I was in corporate till 2019 with that company till 2019. But what I do now is about growth. So I do interim roles for private equity backed businesses. I do consulting, some PLC consulting, some small business consulting. But it's all about growth. So all of my instincts, all of my experience, all of my DNA has been really created in over 20 years in a business that was growing exponentially. So everything, anywhere, any business I get involved in, I only ever see growth opportunity, or if it's not a good news story, no growth opportunity. That's just the way my brain works now, which kind of ties into my convoluted answer to your question about how I prepared. I don't know why, but I've always been interested, fascinated, inspired, all of that stuff by what is the opportunity? How much can we grow by here? What do the customers want to hear when we're in front of them? How do we find them? All of that stuff. So it just seemed to be a great fit for me, and I was very lucky to have landed. Again, I only got the job because the recruiting director was a cyclist and a music fan. It wasn't anything to do with the fact that I'd done a marketing or had worked in a shipbuilder. So I don't think any of that came into it. He just thought, this guy's got a chance. I'm very grateful for that.
So you've talked a little bit about kind of how you grew within the company. I'd love to understand about how you grew as a leader. What was your leadership journey throughout this whole time? Like, when did you start leading people? How did you grow as a leader throughout that time?
So when I started in that business in 2000, I had a small marketing team. I think it was 3 or 4 people. And again, I had no management experience, never mind leadership experience. So that very grateful they took a chance on me. So yeah, and in fact, it's just occurring to me, had it been a bigger PLC, I don't think I'd have got the job. I just don't, because bigger PLCs had more structured process for recruitment. The fact that they were able to bypass that is what gave me the opportunity. Anyway, sorry, back to your question. So I started managing people in that first role, in the head of marketing for Europe role. Then when I moved, so then I had to start leading people. Was different when I went into the P&L leadership role, running initially Scotland, then Scotland.
What do you see as the difference between managing people and leading people?
So managing for me is all very logical. I think great managers are great at structure, process, reviews, reporting. There are some great managers who are really good at that, and some roles only need that. But leadership for me goes beyond that. So that's how you inspire people and get people to do more than just their job, that type of thing. And also, how do you align people around a vision, all that type of stuff. Does that answer your question?
That makes sense. And sorry to interrupt you on that, but I just really wanted to make that clear. So that was really good. Thank you. So please continue. That was really good.
Yeah, but just to say on that, I think you need to have the fundamental management blocks in place even to be a great leader. And if you're not capable of doing it yourself, you need to find somebody who's going to work in your team that can do it. So you can't have, I don't think you can have one without the other.
Agreed.
So yeah, so back to your question. So I then moved into the P&L role, 2004, January 2004, I think. And that was a business that was surrounded by opportunity. I mean, Scotland's a relatively small market, but the business was not tapping into the biggest opportunities. Oil and gas was going through an upturn at that point. Energy and renewables were really starting to come online, so that was a massive opportunity. But so I had to start leading, and the distinction I would draw there is, again, going back to one of my natural traits, which is what is the opportunity and how do we exploit it. I had to understand, so I got analytical and understood the market and who the key players were and all of that stuff and what solutions we could offer to them, and really started to build a vision for that business unit, not separate to the overall strategy of the PLC, but of that business unit. How are we going to grow it? So I had to restructure the sales organization, had to restructure operations. So there was a lot of there was redundancy rounds because of the structure was changing. There was a lot of very challenging. They are management tasks, if you want to call it that, but to be able to take a business through it and come out the other side, that requires leadership, and that required consistent messaging, clarity of objective, all of the stuff that you would expect to hear people who talk about leadership talking about. And it was kind of a baptism of fire, because probably well, what might have been easier, maybe not, but what might have been easier would have been if they'd given me a steady state successful business that only needed someone to mind the shop for a few years and learn the ropes. It was the opposite of that. I mean, it was like it was redundancies. I had to sack some people. There was just it was full on, and very quickly it was tough. But very quickly it did two things. It taught me what the difference between management and leadership is. So that's number one.
Yes.
And two, we came through it successfully. So it established my credibility internally within the organization. That here's this marketing guy that's come along from nowhere and won this job from people with more experience and better CVs for this role. And he's just gone through a bit of a shitstorm and come out the other side of it. And the growth started to ramp really quick. So that was great. So that whole, sorry, to take a step back. So just the reason I went into that role, I think I mentioned, we'd had a strategic review working with very well-known external consultants. And we had to restructure the entire business. So I went into this role, and at the point when we were completely changing the organization, we were changing the senior leadership structure and all the business units. We were changing the go-to-market strategy. Operationally, we were changing the way that we supported our customers. So there was so much for me to do in that very first GM P&L role. I mean, I was either going to sink or swim. And fortunately, it was the latter. But that established my credibility within the organisation, and also it also proved to the business and the team within the business in Scotland that there was a massive opportunity out there that we just hadn't tapped into. And it then starts to become like it builds its own momentum. When the team start to believe in it and you start to make progress and you start to hit targets, and you look back on last year and it's way bigger target than it was the year before, and you've hit it. When all of that stuff starts to happen and really starts to roll, it's a very exciting and fulfilling place to be. So that sorry, I think your question was, when did I first start having to lead people? It would have been through that process, reorganizing a business that. And there were some long-serving people there and lots of cynics. And now we've done this before. Oh, yeah, well, you'll only be here a year and someone else will be here and all that stuff. But it was a tremendous learning experience.
So redundancies can be a massive blow to morale, to culture, to any trust that's in the organization. How were you able to, repair that trust, build the morale, so that actually once that was done, you guys were able to go on to, growing 7 or 8 times, what you'd started with? So how did you do that?
So again, it may sound glib, but I care about people, and I cared about the people that were being affected by the redundancies. So the people that are the people who are not affected or who come through it and keep their jobs are very, very aware of how everybody in the process is treated. So
Yes.
I think I think whether it's somebody who is being made redundant, or even someone who's being dismissed through lack of performance or even gross misconduct or whatever it might be, you absolutely have to treat every individual in every interaction with absolute respect. And I think you need to have a very, very clear process that you go through and you can demonstrate that you are going through, because processes are there for a reason. So I personally, and I can only talk about my experience, the culture and view of the people that are left after that type of restructure is shaped by the way that you treat the people all the way through the process, both those that are affected and those that aren't. So I think if you start from the point of view of absolute respect for the person, absolute respect for the process, I think that's all you can do, is all you can do. And I hope that the reason that I was able to maintain an intact team with morale and commitment, I mean, it was tough, but with commitment and to build a sort of positive way forward and positive momentum, was because I approached every interaction through that process with the first thing being absolute respect for the person involved. And that might be someone who ends up being affected by it or not being affected by it. It doesn't really matter. But you need to just maintain that absolute clarity of process, and your objective is to treat everybody with absolute respect. That's the way I mean, I had never done it. But going back to the fact that I care about people, back to your original question about how did I prepare for it? Well, I didn't specifically, but I think that prepared me for that process because I cared about how it affected the people that were involved. I think that's all you can do.
I love that, because I think that those kind of mindsets and approaches are what help you to be ready, like pretty much almost no matter what the situation is. If you go into it with a good approach, you can kind of figure your way. So I had a leader when I was early in my career, and he said, I want you to be at a place where I know that I can put you in any situation, whether you've been there or not, and I know that you can ask the right questions, you can make the right relationships, and you can make something good at that situation. So for me, approach is everything.
Yeah. And I think just, whether it's redundancy or someone's applied for a job, whatever it is, just start with absolute respect for the individual, and that's all you can do. And then they might be unhappy, but if they feel they've been respected and treated properly, then I think that's all anyone can expect. It's all I expect when I'm working with clients. I just expect that I'm treated with some respect and treated properly. It's all I can ask for.
And what would you say has been your biggest success in your career so far?
Biggest success. I mean, 19 years with that organisation and being part of the journey that took it from 300 million to 1.7, 1.6 billion in 2019. I mean, that's an incredible thing to be part of. I mean, there are businesses that have grown faster. There are, particularly, tech businesses and some software organizations. But, in the industrial services space, and it was technology. I mean, the equipment that the business made, and it was all rented out, was proprietary technology. So it was tech based. But to grow, to be part of that story, and I was right in the centre of it. I was a real part of the growth story. At a high level, that would be, and it was incredible, and I've taken from that a lot of the successes that I've had now as an interim or as a consultant. It is all based on the experience and the success that I had in those 19 years. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a very detailed answer to it, although I hope it makes sense. But to be part of that growth story and part of that journey was incredible. And to feel that I've played a part in that that's a big deal for me. It was fantastic.
And just as we start to wind down, and before we do our Tickfire questions, you'd mentioned something earlier about the interplay between sales and marketing. So you said before, marketing wasn't really part of the heart of the business. So what do you think that interplay between sales and marketing should be for a successful company?
Well, I mean, going back right to that original marketing role, I think what established me in the business was the fact that I always wanted to integrate sales and marketing. So there wasn't any point in having any marketing activity that was not connected to sales activity, was not driving lead gen, was not driving sales activity. For me, the two need to be absolutely interlinked. So, I mean, when I start with a client, then I always start with what's the value proposition. You talk about go-to-market, that's important. Obviously, your structure, what your sales channels, all of that stuff. But for me, whether it's sales or marketing, the sales proposition or marketing proposition, the start point is what's the value proposition to the customer? So what value are you creating for the customer? So that's question number one. And if you can get that articulated clearly and concisely, that then drives your sales proposition. So all of your sales material, all of your sales training, all of your L&D materials is based around that kernel, which is your value proposition, but also all of your marketing messaging and all of your, whether it be sector specific messaging or your digital campaign message, whatever it might be. If you start with that value proposition and build the sales proposition and marketing proposition simultaneously from that point, then you've got messaging at least that's aligned. But then, then there is some technology that you need to make sure you have, so that when you're bringing in the leads, you're making sure that they're being shared properly and quickly and responded to and all of that stuff. So, there's some technical stuff and some structural stuff that you need to do to make sure that they're aligned and connected. But for me, the absolute fundamental start point has to be what's the value proposition.
That makes sense. So we have a bit of a tradition on the podcast where we do Tickfire questions. So it's like quick fire questions that you can answer, and that's how we kind of end the show. So are you ready?
I am ready. Well, I don't know,
ready. Good.
But I'm about prepared as I was for my first role.
I think you have answered actually quite a lot of these questions, so I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So what's the best advice you've ever been given?
Best advice I've ever been given? I mean, I've worked for some great leaders. The leaders I've worked for have always demonstrated by example. They have been true, visible leaders. So, I mean, I think the best piece of advice I've ever been given, and I can't remember who it was, but don't take yourself too seriously. That'd be number one. Not particularly insightful from a business point of view, but hey, it's not a bad philosophy.
Yeah, it's helpful for life.
Yes.
What's the hardest lesson you've had to learn?
Oh, there's quite a number. I think, so one, when we were, and I'll try and keep this vague, or change the names to protect the guilty. We had, in an unnamed role with an unnamed company, we ended up with a very, very large overspend on CapEx one year, very large. And I mean, that was a lesson for me around remaining very close to the detail. I'll not speak, and I'd said before, I don't have I'm not good at micromanaging, and I'm not, but one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn is there are times and situations where you need to be the closest to the detail. There's times where you don't have to be, and that's okay. And, if it's low risk or, you need to work out what are the areas where you can give someone some freedom and space and let them make mistakes if they do, and you can clear it up and deal with it. but what are the areas that are not like that? And I had a very, very tough lesson on CapEx overspend that I wasn't close enough to the detail on. I should have been much closer to the detail. And it was painful. It was painful. There are others, but that one sprung immediately to mind.
Yeah, do you know what? So CapEx is one of the things that can sometimes keep you up at night because it can sneak up on you very quickly if you're not all over it.
Well, it sneaked up on me very quickly.
So final question is, where do you go to grow?
Where do I go to grow? So, I mean, I think, again, if you didn't know before, then you'll know now I'm not a quick fire answer kind of guy. So it depends on the growth. So putting myself in situations I'm not familiar with. So from a business perspective, putting myself in situations where I'm not necessarily 100% comfortable or experienced, that helps me grow. I did an interim role where at the end of it I had a wrap up with the chairman, and they brought me in because I've got a lot of experience, and they thought, this is great, he's seen all of this, he's done all of this, let's get him in. And the first thing I said in the wrap up review was, I've learned a huge amount during this. And he said, well, that's not really why we brought you in. But it was painful, painful at times.
Yeah.
And so whether it was in corporate or whether it's in interim or whether it's in consulting projects, I'm not a mind the shop kind of guy. I'm not someone that likes to come in, everything steady state, spin the wheel for a while, then step out. That's just not me. So in that respect, where I go to grow is into difficult situations that need some emotional intelligence, need some energy and some experience and some willingness to be wrong and be proven wrong. So that helps me grow. Yeah, that from a business perspective, that's probably the main thing, to not just do things that I've done 73 times before, because that just doesn't hold any interest for me.
Love that. Grant, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation and just hearing your journey and your story. So thank you so much for sharing.
Tolu, thank you. All the best to you.
Likewise, and thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Right. Thanks for listening to What Makes You Tick, and I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. You don't have to have met someone in real life to be mentored by them, right? We've all got favourite sales books, and hopefully this podcast is giving you access to a whole new tribe of mentors who, through their stories and best advice, will help you to achieve a bigger and better career in tech. So if you want to never miss a beat, subscribe now, and then you'll get notified as soon as next week's mentor releases their story. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.